Hello, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to have a quick look at some ongoing, potentially, developments in Australia with regards to how the social media landscape is being shaped by government legislation. Some of you may or may not be aware that the government is seeking to introduce legislation that will create a greater onus on social media platforms in relation to the things that are shared or posted on their services. Now, I want to be very clear that we're going to go into this and there's going to be some framing devices used where it talks about things like harassment, stalking, bullying, some really awful things that I definitely agree are problems when it comes to social media and online interactions, and things that we do need to address in terms of helping people to make sure that they're safe online and to make sure that people that are abusing connections that can be made online in very immediate and constant ways with other people, that bad behavior that happens across those connections does need to be dealt with. Now, my criticism of what we're going to look at is not the material appearance of these bad behaviors. It's the fact that I think these negative online interactions are actually being used as a cover for something that has very little to do with that and is contrary to the stated goals of what the Liberal government, federal government of Australia, is seeking to propose when it comes to policing the online environment. For those of you keeping score, when it comes to social media and when it comes to places like Twitter and YouTube and stuff, there is a lot of criticism out there of conservative governments. In Australia in particular, I'll draw your attention to the fact that we also have a very unhealthy traditional media landscape where our newspapers, our TV news reporting, our cable news networks are almost exclusively conservative, in that we have only right-leaning news sources, where we have some attempts at appearing left-leaning. Left-leaning is not the right word there. Center, I guess. But ultimately, like, you look at a lot of the stuff. So even you look at our national broadcasting corporation, the ABC, which is meant to be a non-partisan news service, you'll see that it will criticize ideas that are considered progressive or liberal, while it will more often than not defend conservative ideas. And so we have a very uneven landscape when it comes to reporting of news when we look at traditional media. When we go to new media sources, when we go to social media, online platforms where people like myself and normal people can start to share their opinions, that's where we start to see a bit more of a balance between things. Like, you particularly look at things like climate change, when only very recently has it become acknowledged that platforming climate denial is actually not something that furthers balanced reporting. It actually goes against balanced reporting by showing ideas that are not equally supported by science as if they were equal. That's only sort of recently started to become a criticism of traditional media, whereas it's something that online has been very consistent about being like, no, if you're a climate denier, you're a fucking idiot. There's no discussion there. There's no equivocation of politics there. It is just a scientific fact that we need to do something about climate change. So social media is probably the last bastion of criticism that conservative governments, and this is not just Australia, you'll see this in America too, whereas at least America does have a bit more of a balancing agent in terms of like CNN versus Fox News. It's not just Fox News and not quite Fox News. It is literally, it's like a battle between, I won't say good and evil, but there's clear counter reporting when it comes to most stories. So you get a bit more robust idea of what's going on. So what is all this foreshadowing? All this is foreshadowing that our lovely Prime Minister has decided that one of the big issues that his government is looking to tackle is not climate change. It's not supporting people that need help when they're on assistance programs like job assistance or disability or anything like that. It's not about restoring the arts industry after they've been decimated by COVID. No. One of the biggest issues facing our Prime Minister, in his mind, is the fact that social media companies are not currently held accountable completely for what their users say. So essentially, we had a announcement on Sunday. So this was on the 20th of November when this was published, where he talks about the fact that social media companies are basically getting away with
The online world provides many great
problematic, i.e., not conservative-friendly positions.
opportunities, but it comes with some real risks. And we must address these, or it will continue to have a very harmful and corrosive impact on our society, on our community. Our government has been taking action on this. We've been standing up and stepping up when it comes to the actions of the big digital media platforms. Getting them to pay their tax, making sure they respect and support the freedom of our press. But most importantly,
respecting the freedom of their press, what he's referring to there is the attempt to make Facebook and Google and any platform where news links were being shared, that they're expected to pay news providers for allowing links to their content to be shared on social media platforms. Let that sink in. I'm not aware of anywhere else in the world that has tried to make that connection between social media platforms where people share links to sources of news become under scrutiny for not paying those news sources to share those links.
Making sure that the rules that exist in the real world must exist in the digital and online world. The online world shouldn't be a wild west where bots and bigots and trolls and others can...
Bigots.
Just anonymously going around and harm people and hurt people, harass them and bully them and sledge them. That's not Australia.
Harass, bully, sledge. Remember those words.
Real world. And there's no case for it to be able to be happening in the digital world. Australia wants to be, and we are fast on the way to becoming, one of the world's leading digital economies. But for that to be true, the digital world has to be safe. As a parent, talking to other parents, I can tell you, the thing that concerns us is that our kids are dealing with an online world which we never knew as kids growing up.
I contend that the proportion of parents who didn't grow up with the internet is very quickly becoming the minority compared to parents that did grow up with the internet. I consider myself to have grown up with the internet. I got internet at age 13. I know that's not 5 or 6, but that's when you're socially aware enough to go online and start trying to get yourself in trouble. And I know plenty of people around my age that have got kids that are 12, 10, of age as well. And they're fully aware of the internet and stuff. So it's classic fear-mongering.
And that we never had experience.
I just wanted to call that out. He's fear-mongering.
More recent generations have had some experience of that, but I think about our kids going through this today. I think particularly how the online world is used to harass women in particular. They are one of the biggest victims when it comes to the terrible things that we see in the online world. And our government is stepping up and standing up to those we need to stand up to. There is no place for people to be anonymously going around and undertaking this horrific abuse and harassment and stalking online. The online world.
So at the end of that interview, it very quickly pivoted from harassment, stalking, sledging into a narrative around sexual harassment of women. So there's something I read today. Let's see if I can find it quickly. So 3 hours. Yeah, right. No, okay, let's use ABC. Fuck it. 10 hours ago on ABC. Review finds 1 in 3 staff in federal parliament experience sexual harassment. Oh, look, it's our friend, Scott Morrison, who has a massive concern around the harassment of women online and so is introducing legislation to hold social media companies responsible. We will get back to how he plans on doing that. But let's remember that the dog whistle he made for justifying the legislation that he has described so far that we're going to discuss shortly is the abuse and harassment of women was the final and probably the most emotional plea he made in order to justify what he's about to propose. 1 in 3 people working in federal parliament have experienced some kind of sexual harassment there, according to a review of workplace culture sparked by rape allegations made by Brittany Higgins. Now, I want to also draw attention to the fact that the divide between men and women exists in terms of, let's assume that they reflect about the population of 50-50 men and women. Women disproportionately are affected by sexual harassment. So 1 in 3 people, 33% of people that work in federal parliament, have experienced some kind of sexual harassment. What percentage of women do you think are in parliament? If it's 50%, that means 60% of women in parliament have potentially experienced sexual harassment. It boggles the mind to start thinking about how that breaks down when you reduce it to the population of women and adjust for the fact that they are more likely to experience sexual harassment. But we won't, anyway, not what this video is about. So the review found more than half of all people in Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces experienced at least one incident of bullying, sexual harassment, or actual or attempted sexual assault. Prime Minister Scott Morrison released the report. Oh, it's been released. Maybe we should look at that. Let me know down below if you'd like to look at that. Thanking those who contributed to the review, including Ms. Higgins, which is interesting considering how Brittany Higgins got treated when her voice was speaking up for many that the report proves do exist. Where are we? Here we go. So Mr. Morrison said, it was appalling and disturbing that 33% reported some kind of sexual harassment. I wish I found it more surprising. Now, you tell me, if you have someone who is in the highest position in a workplace who tells you that when there has been a report of sexual harassment identified as a cultural issue in your workplace, and you're like, I wish I was more surprised. What does that tell you about them? To me, what it tells me is that they are aware it happened, they knew about it before the report, and they either were unable to or chose not to act. If they're unable to act while they're in the highest position where everyone reports to, everyone answers to Scott Morrison when it comes to the culture and the setting of the Federal Parliament of Australia. So if he was aware of it to the point where he's not surprised when 1 in 3 people in Parliament experience sexual harassment, I feel like that's a self-report. I feel like that is him telling us that he knew it was happening. He knew it was an issue and he chose not to act upon it. And we'll note that none of this is actually then going on to talk about how they're going to put in place legislation that holds MPs responsible for their behaviour and for their actions when it comes to sexual harassment, either happening because they are predators or being allowed to happen because they protect predators. That is amazing. Amazing that that is not the outcome there, because we are about to go back to this story about social media platforms, which is allegedly about harassment, bullying, bigotry, and, you know, spent a reasonable amount of time talking about the way women get harassed online. So anyway, we won't go through all that today, but let me know if we do want to go through that report, because that's actually interesting. I read the news story, but it didn't click to me that there was actually a report on it. So we go back to here. Excuse me, we've seen the video. Thank you very much. So social media companies could be forced to reveal the identities of anonymous users in an effort to crack down on online trolling under new laws being drafted by the federal government. The laws would require social media companies to collect the details of all users and allow courts to force companies to hand over the identities of users to aid defamation cases. Interesting. So we've gone from bullying, harassment, and sledging to defamation. Defamation is a very specific act when it comes to the law, and it would not capture bullying and harassment widely. It would capture a very specific type of that. So it says to me so far that they are looking at things that they believe are said that are just wrong about people, and not looking at things that harm people. So interesting when we think about this in the context of the Israel Folau clause in the religious discrimination bill, where it wouldn't be considered defamation to say a gay person is going to go to hell. They're trying to protect that speech, but then here we've got some other form of defamation that they seem to be concerned about. Social media companies would also be made legally liable for the content they publish from users, removing liability from individuals and companies that manage pages. This is coded language, and I think it's said explicitly elsewhere, where what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a law that will enforce the status of publisher on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and all those types of platforms. And this is something we're seeing quite a lot. So you'll actually see it a lot in America. I think recently even Steven Crowder was talking about it when he was talking about Twitter with the CEO stepping down. You see a lot of this discussion about YouTube as a publisher, Facebook as a publisher, because when they choose to take down posts about ivermectin or posts about tampering of election results or posts about Hunter Biden's laptop, that because they are removing certain speech while allowing other speech, that they're acting as an editor, they're editing the information on the website, and therefore they're a publisher. Now, this is a completely brain dead take. This is one of those, I've said it a lot of times, Republicans think one step ahead and then they immediately stop. And in this case, what they're doing is they're thinking one step ahead. They're thinking, my post saying that the vaccine causes autism and puts little robots in your body that make you a Democrat and gay, that got taken down, that got banned. My free speech is being infringed. You're acting like a publisher. Therefore, I'm going to start advocating and supporting for Facebook, YouTube, wherever, to be treated like a publisher. What happens when we make online public platforms not a public platform, but a private publisher? We have an example. We have something we can look at to understand where this leads, and what it is copyright law. So let's look at YouTube. YouTube has a very strong and a very well-developed copyright system in place, and it sucks. I get it. I've done videos before where I've tried to do critique reviews or, analyze copyrighted media, which is in a way that is 100% fair use, and I would have no issue with that in the court of law. But because of the way copyright laws are currently structured and the way that YouTube is allowed to operate without being culpable for copyrighted material, is that they have to actually have policies in place that demonstrate that they are making a more than goodwill, they are making a concerted effort to prevent and remove copyrighted material at every step. That's how we get content ID matching. That's how we get flagging for copyright after people just upload the original files and stuff. So like things like TV shows or music are going to get picked up by the algorithm and immediately blocked or immediately flagged as copyright material. And we have very strict policies where in YouTube, it's very difficult to do things that are fair use, plainly fair use, because the system overrides fair use, and we have to proactively go and defend it after the copyright strike has hit us. And that's expensive, and I can't do that. Most content creators probably decide not to do that, and that has reduced the amount of creative and interesting and culturally relevant material that we've been able to produce online as citizens of the internet. That is one thing that completely sucks and makes me sad. That's actually one of the main things that I did in my final thesis when I was doing my communications degree, was looking at how new digital communications are trying to undermine the grip that copyright holders have on our cultural heritage. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a part of me growing up. It's like you think of fairy tales or nursery rhymes that I could sing or repeat or publish books on because they don't have copyright on them. And that's part of a cultural shared identity. But I can't do the same with the things that I grew up with. I can't do that with He-Man, with Ninja Turtles, with Robotech, with Dragon Ball Z. That sort of stuff, particularly anything that's owned by Disney, like forget it. Forget it. That doesn't belong to me. I was only borrowing it. That doesn't matter that it was an important part of our shared heritage. We can't interact with it as people. And that's all because copyright laws have made it the responsibility of the publisher or the platform to protect the copyright holder, not the people. So they're not protecting my right to fairly use copyrighted material in ways that are protected by the law. They're required by the law to protect the copyright holder. And hey, 95% of the stuff that they flag, it's probably fair use, but that 5% that might be illegal use, that might be infringing on copyright, if they don't do that, they'll be held responsible. They'll get all the lawsuits for copyright infringement, and suddenly the platform is not viable, the platform can't sustain itself, and we lose YouTube altogether, which is arguably even worse, as much as copyright sucks. Now, this legislation and this way of thinking and saying, well, I want to define social media as a publisher instead of a platform is going to lead to the same outcomes in public discourse as copyright leads to when it comes to fair use of copyrighted materials. The obvious risk here, though, is that public discourse, infinitely broad, versus copyright, well, I can talk about that episode of Supernatural without showing you any material from it, and they're not going to flag me. It's all going to be fine. Whereas when we're talking about defamation, like defamation clearly is what they're looking at here. Like, what if I repeat the often ascribed urban legend that a particular prime minister shit his pants in McDonald's at a place called Engadine? You can go to Google, you can type in Engadine McDonald's, look at the Google reviews, and hilarious. Fucking great time. Is that defamation, though? Right? I'm defaming the character of someone. I'm doing it publicly. I have an audience. The probably one thing it doesn't meet for defamation cases is material loss. But then how do you measure loss when it comes to a politician? Like, if I say this and then there's an election and he loses and people have clipped me and posted this all over the internet, can he then claim it's because of me that he lost the election and that's it? This is the fuzzy nature of these types of laws that will make it so that YouTube and Facebook and Twitter will have to proactively ban that type of speech. And how are they going to do that? How is that going to be achieved? That's the scary part. The worst potential part of this is that, unfortunately, the Labor, here we've got like, they are proactively going to chase this. They're looking at setting up a commission to cover this. They're looking at finding small individual cases to test their proposed laws if they get through. The government will be happy to intervene in court and take on social media companies trying to avoid releasing personal details, looking for test cases. We'll back them in the courts and we'll take them on. The establishment of a public defender's office, that's not cheap. Lawyers aren't cheap. I'm pretty sure lawyers aren't cheap. And so this is all would then require that that social media companies are going to need my personal information too. I don't provide that to the majority of social media that I'm a part of. I don't believe Twitter has any of my personal information on how to contact me, with the exception of maybe an email. And even then, emails are disposable to a certain degree. So if this comes in, I can just switch to a different Gmail address. But then this would mean that it would require, Australia would have to require social media companies to collect personal information for the purposes of identifying me if someone seeks to claim that I've defamed them. All I can say is VPN. As soon as that happens, I'm not happening. Not happening. I'm not giving up that level of freedom because conservatives are worried that we're going to make fun of them on social media. He's big bark on ScoMo. It's not so much a discussion with them. I'm doing this, and I expect them to respond. So the disappointing part is that the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, has not yet expressed opposition to this. It's really disappointing that conservative talking points like platforms being turned into publishers is not immediately opposed by the Labor government. But at the end of the day, they're a centre party. They're not a left party. So maybe I'm expecting too much. I just want them to do better. I want them to start appealing to people like me instead of trying to continually dig at the centre right instead of going after the further left. But he does bring up the idea that how the laws would be might be avoided. So, like I said, VPN and stuff, and also he's throwing a bit of shade here, going, "Oh, it's not going to be actually delivered." I mean, I hope it's not delivered myself, but he does point out that accounts not registered in Australia may not be subject to this. This is like what happens in some Asian countries. Like, I'm pretty sure in China, your social security details are married to your online status. Same in South Korea. Like you actually need to use some sort of government ID number or phone number, something that's linked to your actual personhood. And like that's needed to create accounts and stuff in games and all that sort of stuff. So it happens out there, but the fact that it might happen in Australia, it it really concerns me. And what really shits me at the end of the day, though, is that, like I said, this is imported Republican bullshit from America after they got their fucking ass handed to them when their fuckwit President Trump couldn't stop tweeting dumb shit. And now suddenly, free speech, free speech, free speech. You're infringing on my free speech by not letting us like spread misinformation and like claim voter fraud where there's no evidence of it, to start talking shit about coronavirus being a pandemic, about vaccine hesitancy. And this is how you coalesce into like all this QAnon bullshit where platforms, in my opinion, should be able to 100% curate the type of content that they want on their platform, providing the spaces that are safe for people to come and be a part of. So a good example is you don't necessarily want to cater to people on Twitter that are necessarily transphobic or homophobic and are going to seek to cause harm to people in those groups by being bigoted, by using slurs, by constantly harassing and stalking them through profiles. That speech, I think, no one would say up front that, oh, that should be protected. But I think when we start getting to the point of like, if I want to call something from the LNP or someone from the LNP a fucking dumbass grifter because they are doing something that is dumbass grifting, or that they are protecting sexual predators because they operate and they are essentially the highest position in an office that has a 1 in 3 occurrence of people experiencing sexual abuse, and they don't appear to look into that as much as they look at online bullying, despite the fact they are immediately able to solve that problem with far less resources. And for that to then leave me open for defamation. Bearing in mind that it's not that my details get provided if it is found that a particular post meets the definition and is a 100% case of defamation. My information is given before it's even been established as a fact. It is given when there's an accusation. It's not given when something's been established. It boggles my mind. And every time you see these dumb fuck conservatives who will, in one tweet, in one video, they will talk about how free speech is a constitutional right if they're in America, or a natural human right if they're outside America, or if it's, the worst thing that can be taken from people. And yet then they'll be sitting here going, no, platforms should be publishers. We should make sure that the public platforms where people exercise their free speech become as reductive as possible in terms of their allowed content because of broad authoritarian laws that dictate how people can talk. Because if they don't say things in the exact perfect way, then they're going to be open to defamation lawsuits. Think about how many people can watch videos on YouTube. You've got 1 to thousands, 10,000s, 100,000, millions of people watching a video, and you think about one person who watches that video and goes, that's defamation, and they bring a case towards you. You think about how you've got content trolls for copyright that will make copyright claims frivolously, and you think whether or not the same thing will happen in this, where people will get access to your personal information because they make a claim about defamation lawsuits. I'm worried. I'm interested when the draft comes out. And again, maybe we'll go through it on stream. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. But other than that, fuck. Click.